It's sickening. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have to accept it. It doesn't have to be this way. Bad leaders let this happen, weak leaders.
The hearing comes after the death of Irina Zarutska, a Ukrainian refugee who was stabbed to death as she rode a Charlotte light rail train by a man who had been arrested and released 14 times. There was a stunning announcement last week that Google was going to reinstate YouTube accounts it had banned under pressure from the Biden administration.
At the height of the COVID pandemic, Google, which owns YouTube, was permanently banning any account with videos that deviated from the official government narrative. Last week, Google sent a letter to the House Judiciary Committee that admitted they censored all those accounts under pressure from the Biden White House. Committee Chairman Jim Jordan told the Jenna Ellis in the Morning Show, the irony is that official narrative was wrong about everything.
They told us it wasn't our money used at that lab in China. It was. They told us it wasn't gain-of-function research done there. Yes, it was. They told us it didn't come from the lab. They told us the vaccinated couldn't get it. They told us the vaccinated couldn't transmit the virus. They told us masks worked. They told us 6 feet social distancing was based on science. And they told us this was the first virus where there was no natural immunity.
Jordan says the committee's working on legislation that says if there are people in the government involved in censoring Americans, the victims have a right to take them to court.
We're going to look at things in the future we can do that are even stronger and more helpful in protecting Americans' First Amendment liberties.
He says online freedom of speech is under threat across the globe. In England, for example, people are going to jail for posting anything remotely controversial.
They highlighted the concern that's going on in Europe, which is real. And it's just a matter of time before the European laws actually infringe on Americans' First Amendment liberties.
I'm Steve Jordahl.
And finally, Tropical Storm Imelda is strengthening, expected to soon become a hurricane, and Florida is bracing for its impact.
Life-threatening rip currents will be the primary threat as Tropical Storm Imelda works up the east coast of Florida. It should stay between 125 to 150 miles offshore, but with it, 1 to 2 inches of additional rain with winds immediately along the coast upwards of 40 miles per hour. Unfortunately, we are learning that the rip currents have already proved fatal. A 51-year-old man over the weekend dragged out to sea by a powerful rip current. Volusia County Sheriff's Office saying stay out of the water. In Melbourne Beach, Florida, I'm Michael Estiman for Fox Weather.
More news online at afn.net and the AFN mobile app. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Some Christians wonder if boycotting businesses is really biblical, and that's a fair question. Ed Vitagliano and M.D. Perkins address that subject in depth in the AFA Cultural Institute video, Stewardship in Action, The Power of the Boycott. They share the purpose of boycotts and show how they can impact the culture. We're giving that DVD to you free as our thanks for supporting AFA this month. Go to afa.net today for more details. afa.net.
We inform.
Religious freedom is about people of faith being able to live out their faith, live out their convictions, no matter where they are.
We equip.
Sacred honor is the courage to speak truth, to live out your free speech.
We also rejoice in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome to The Core here on American Family Radio. I'm Walker Wildmon. Glad to have you with us on this brand new edition of the program. This show is hosted each week by Rick Green and myself, and we are pleased to be with you each and every day on the radio program. Once again, this is AFR. You can check out our website, afr.net, afr.net. Let's turn our attention to the scripture for the program today, and this week we'll be in Proverbs chapter 28, verse 1. Proverbs chapter 28, verse 1. The wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous are bold as a lion. The wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous are bold as a lion. How fitting in the weeks following the Charlie Kirk assassination to read this scripture, which we've been going chronologically through the book of Proverbs. And, or rather, as the book was was compiled and written. The wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous are bold as a lion. And you extrapolate this and apply it to everyday life that we experience as believers throughout history. And there's so much truth packed in here. You know, you look at the unrighteous, look at the wicked, those who are boastful in their sin, those who are not pursuing godliness, those who are rejecting their Creator, the unbelieving world, to sum it up. And their ways are dark. Their ways are shameful, and it's self-evident. And an example I think about as we cover the news of the day is this left-wing, what's kind of displaying itself as a left-wing political movement, a Marxist movement, one of fear and intimidation, one of paganism and allowing the desires of the flesh to rule. This entire political movement that ultimately is a spiritual movement of darkness. But when you look at how the other side, the side that doesn't recognize the light, capital L, as you read John chapter 1, you see that Jesus himself is described as the light. John the Baptist came to testify to the light coming, talking about Jesus. But how the modern godless and dark movement operates politically and otherwise and ideologically in this land, at least in the American context, their shame and their godlessness is on display. It doesn't take profound wisdom. It doesn't take, a degree in philosophy and religion to look out and see what is darkness and what is light. And the specific example I was going to tell you about is when you see how these Antifa and otherwise, these militant type street gangs, for lack of a better word, that are operating in America's major cities now, attacking law enforcement and immigration officials, the way they operate is dark. It's shameful, and it's self-evident. The way they assault officers, they hurl profanities and vulgarities. They know exactly what they can do to provoke violence and to provoke insult and injury, and it's just so dark. And so it's if you look at the world and you look at what's going on in America today with a spiritual understanding, you can see that there is a very dark force over this land. And this is not necessarily new or breaking 2025. You can look throughout other examples of human history, both here in America and abroad, and see elements of spiritual darkness coming over the land. But in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination, and it seems like every other day there's some mass shooting, people are just consumed with wickedness, and abortion is lauded as some noble thing. The killing of innocent children is lauded as some noble thing. People's sexual deviancy is flaunted as something to be proud of and boastful of. And we could go down the list of other sins that are flaunted as publicly acceptable when they're not. And then I read Proverbs 28, verse 1, the wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous are bold as a lion. And that's going to sum up, folks, the end times. That Proverbs 28, verse 1 will sum up the end times, because when all of humanity has to do what the Scripture says, and that is that at some day in the end times, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. When that judgment day comes and every person realizes that Jesus is real that God is real and that judgment will come, these type scriptures will come to life before our very eyes. And darkness cannot be in the presence of God. Sin cannot be in the presence of God. And that's what Proverbs 28 is alluding to. All right, let's jump into our news stories that I want to get to this segment. In Washington, D.C., the Congress, and this is almost comical, Congress has to pass a spending bill by, tomorrow at midnight. So technically Wednesday at midnight, 12:01 a.m. Wednesday, but into tomorrow evening, the Congress has to pass a spending bill to fund the government for the next year because the fiscal year ends September 30th and October 1 starts the new fiscal year. This is not anything complicated or anything new. It's been going on in Washington, D.C. for a very, very long time. Since the founding fathers, and even before that, before that we were our own country, we still had to pass a budget. The colonies did, but nonetheless, politicians in Washington are acting like this whole budget thing is a new thing, and they just didn't see it coming. I didn't see it coming, folks. I'm gonna get into my criticisms. I'm gonna talk about who's to blame, and we'll get there. Don't worry. But it is so difficult as an outsider looking in. And I hope many of you can share my frustration here. I'm sure you do. Some of you probably wouldn't be as generous as I'm going to be. But why are we arguing 2 days before it has to be done about the budget? Are you kidding me here? We've known this is coming. Washington, D.C., all of our elected officials in the executive branch, including the president, they've known this is coming. Every year on September 30th, a budget by September 30th, a budget for the next fiscal year has to be passed. And when you translate this over to the state level or to the private sector level, with companies, you can give me any other example, whether it be government or private sector, of budgets needing to be proposed, voted on, and passed. Every organization, every nonprofit technically has to have an annual budget that the board of directors reviews. Every church, most functioning church congregations put together a budget for the year. And so even families have budgets. Individuals have budgets. It's just part of stewardship. It's part of managing that which God has entrusted us with. And somehow our elected officials on both sides of the aisle, they, quote, let this sneak up on them, in air quotes. And then when the time comes for the budget to be passed, they all act like they didn't see it coming. We're just shocked. We're just not going to meet the deadline. We've got to do a temporary extension through November. A 6-week extension, that's the best you can do. Actually, 7 weeks past Thanksgiving. That's the best you can do. A 7-week extension so you guys can get your act together. Give me a break. What is going to change in 7 weeks? What is going to substantially change in 7 weeks that makes it to where you can't pass a full year budget right now? The reality is nothing's going to change. It's all political posturing. It's all seeing who's going to blink first in the negotiations, and it's all a show. And so I'm really disappointed in myself that I'm actually having to spend even part of a segment talking about this. Shame on me, wasting our airtime. But it is in the news. And both sides are acting like they didn't see this coming. And it's just frustrating. It's just frustrating. And I mean, we're not talking about some sophisticated legislative item that takes a lot of debate and time. This is the annual budget. All right? Either you can do it or you can't. And enough of this, we're gonna fund it for a week or 6 weeks or 2 months until we can, quote, negotiate. No. Just negotiate now for better or worse. Whatever's in it is in it. All of our elected officials are held accountable at the ballot box. Enough of this blame game, political posturing, kicking the can down the road. Just fund the government. Just fund the government. Half of the bills are already due anyway. Half of the stuff that they're approving in the budget is already accounted for. There's no option. Same thing with the debt limit. Let's negotiate the debt limit. Our Rand Paul says, I don't think we should increase the debt limit. Oh, really, Rand Paul? Even though we've already spent the money? No. You can't not raise the debt limit. The debt limit is a joke at this point. The real battle comes down to the budget. Now, if Rand Paul wants to fight over the budget, I'm 100% on board with that. Let's fight over the budget because that's where the money is spent. When you go to negotiating the debt limit, the money is already spent, folks. It's just a matter of Congress voting on, are we going to pay our credit card bill or not, basically. You can't, the country can't debate whether or not to pay its credit card bill. You pay the bill, right? You have to be solvent. You have to, send a signal to the creditors that you're going to pay your bills. So the debt limit is a charade. It's a complete joke. We shouldn't even waste 1 minute debating the debt limit. And I actually think the debt limit and the budget should go together in one package because it's essentially the same thing. When you approve the budget, you're approving the limit in which we can borrow money because it's a budget. The money's being allocated. I know all of this makes sense for us, but apparently in Washington it's more complicated. And so here I've spent the whole segment. We've got 30 seconds left talking about the budget and the debt limit. But maybe we'll talk about this more in the next segment. We're going to have a great guest on. But I know many of you share my frustration. The Congress, one of the fundamental responsibilities outlined by our founding fathers in the Constitution itself is who can spend money. Congress can spend money. Who can pass a budget to spend that money? Both chambers of the legislative branch, the House and the Senate, can pass a budget through the appropriations process, and the president signs the bill, unless they override the veto. The president signs the spending bill into law, and then the Treasury Department can dispense the funds. Simple as that. The budget deadline is the same every year per constitutional mandate. September 30th of every year, the next year's fiscal budget must be passed. Why we wait until the last week of September to start debating this on national television is quite beyond me. I really don't have a good answer for you. But that's what we're dealing with in Washington this week. We'll be back in a few.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. The city lies 4 square, its length, width, and height all equal, 1,380 miles for each dimension. The city's wall is 216 feet high, 12 gates around the city, with each gate made of a single pearl. Streets of gold so pure they're translucent. No need for a sun. God's glory lights the city. No tears, no pain. I wouldn't miss it for the world.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
The enemy wants to destroy anything of God's, especially mankind who is made in God's image.
What would it be like if every person knew that they were created in the image of God?
We're talking about people loved by the Father. People for whom Jesus died.
We have to stand on God's truth.
We hear in culture all the time, we need to find ourselves. We need to go find our identity. We are already defined. We are known before the foundations of the world.
In His Image is a life-changing film that has helped people break free from the grip of evil. It will take you through Scripture to show the truth and its powerful testimonies will destroy Satan's attempts to pervert God's perfect design.
We now know with the genome of all of the DNA that there is no propensity towards a genetic disposition to homosexual behavior.
Watch it for the first time or again with someone who needs to see it anytime on AFA Stream. Stream.afa.net.
Hey, my name is Wesley Wildmon.
And I'm Walker Wildmon.
And we're brothers, and our family have been leading tours to the land of the Bible for more than 30 years.
Coming up in March of 2026, we would love for you to join us for something very special, a Footsteps of Paul tour, a journey through Greece.
We'll walk exactly where the Apostle Paul walked, through Athens, ancient Corinth, Philippi, and Thessalonica.
You'll enjoy unforgettable experiences and meaningful fellowship with believers and with Wesley and Walker.
And we'll eat well, laugh a lot, and yes, eat well again. And most importantly, we will grow in our faith as the Bible comes alive before your eyes. You'll get to see the very things that we read about or that your pastor talks about in church.
The Footsteps of Paul tour is March 17th through the 24th, 2026.
Register today at wildmangroup.com.
That's wildmangroup.com. We can't wait to see you there.
At the Core podcasts are available at afr.net. Now, back to At the Core on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to The Core here on American Family Radio. Glad to have you with us. We would love for you to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. The more of you that subscribe to the podcast in your podcast library, the better the rankings do. And so when folks are looking for programs like this or this program, it helps it queue up better in the search results. So go type in At the Core, click the subscribe button, and you'll have the podcast queued up in your library each and every day. I want to jump to our next guest to continue this discussion about the spending legislation in Washington. Trevor Carlson is with us, Senior Research Fellow over at the Foundation for Government Accountability, otherwise known as FGA. Trevor's with us now. Trevor, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, Trevor, I spent nearly my whole last segment, talking cynically about how Washington waits until the day before the budget has to be passed to start debating the budget, even though they've had 11 months prior to figure this thing out. But nonetheless, there are some core items that Democrats are squawking over. Democrats are insisting that Republicans, including the president, fund. So tell us about these wish list items that Chuck Schumer and the Democrats want to continue funding.
Sure, and I'll start with probably a simpler one, which is first they are targeting or going after the one big beautiful bill, the reconciliation bill that the Republicans and the president were able to get through that was signed on July 4th. And one of the things that's in that reconciliation bill, or was in it, is $50 billion for rural health. And so by going after the bill that was passed earlier this year, they're also jeopardizing the funding that is supposed to be going to help rural communities that have generally had some financing issues. And so this sort of transformational funding is at jeopardy if that's one of the negotiating points that at least has been one of the negotiating points. But another one, and this seems to be the bigger one that's getting more attention, is what I refer to as the Biden COVID credits. These are Obamacare subsidies on top of traditional Obamacare. They were passed by congressional Democrats and signed by President Biden in the American Rescue Plan Act, and then extended under the misnamed Inflation Reduction Act. And so it might be helpful for me to give just a brief bit of context on the Obamacare subsidies and how those worked before the Biden COVID credits, and then what the implications of the new credits were. And so essentially, because Obamacare had new mandates and pricing rules, the architects realized that was going to put upward pressure on premiums, and it would have sort of disincentives for relatively young and healthy people. And so Obamacare included an individual mandate and these massive taxpayer subsidies. So while the individual mandate was zeroed out in 2017, these costly subsidies remain. Now, the subsidies work by capping the enrollees' contribution to their premiums at about between 2 to 10% of income. And so it's an open-ended subsidy. Regardless of how expensive premiums get, the enrollee only pays a little bit. The vast majority is then picked up by federal taxpayers. And so that subsidy, the original subsidies, ranged from incomes up to 100% of the federal poverty limit, which is about $16K for an individual, and that would be about $32,000 for a family of four, and up to 400% of federal poverty. And so, again, those subsidies are capped at the income, and so that's why, that's what makes them incredibly generous. So as subsidies increase, the amount that the enrollee pays is relatively low. And so, again, when sort of under the guise of COVID, Democrats passed the inflation or the American Rescue Plan Act. They then extended these subsidies in the Inflation Reduction Act. Again, I think incredibly misnamed because it was actually the Inflation Increasing Act. And those new subsidies changed in two important ways. One was it removed the income cap. So households with incomes above 400% of the federal poverty level became eligible for these subsidies. And importantly, they also increased the generosity of these subsidies so that households up to incomes of 150% FPL, they would pay $0 in premiums. And so you can understand that that would create a whole mess of perverse incentives and make them susceptible to fraud. The original Obamacare subsidies were susceptible to fraud, even more so the enhanced subsidies, the Biden COVID credits.
Once again, we're talking to Trevor Carlson with the Foundation for Government Accountability. He's a senior research fellow there. Trevor, this essentially sounds like the Democrats are wanting to do two things here. They're wanting to chip away at the One Big Beautiful Bill, when possible, through this annual spending bill. And while they're doing that, they're wanting to continue some of the Biden-era programs. And what makes this even something that the Republicans have to negotiate on is the fact that in the Senate, they've still got this fake filibuster, the filibuster that isn't a filibuster, where you've got to have 60 votes to pass legislation. And so that's why Chuck Schumer can hold up the bill. But this is a pivotal moment, Trevor, for the Trump administration and the Republicans. I think it's undisputed that the political and cultural momentum is in the favor of the conservative movement right now. And so I don't think there's much incentive at all for President Trump or the Republicans to kowtow to the Democrats. But this is a big deal. I mean, I think this could drag on weeks, if not a month, like we saw back in the first Trump term, because President Trump can't afford, from a political and practical standpoint, to give Chuck Schumer what he wants here. He just can't do it. Your thoughts?
I think that it's important to focus on the absolute terrible consequences of extending these subsidies. So, like I said earlier, they became susceptible to fraud. There's an adage in medical textbooks that when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. Well, that comes from Sutton's Law, which famed bank robber Willie Sutton was asked, "Why do you rob banks?" And the answer was, because that's where the money is. Well, that's what happens when you have massive government subsidies and programs like this, and you have very lax program integrity. It opens the door to fraudulent bad actors who are going to basically rip off the taxpayer. And that's what we've seen with these Biden COVID credits, where an estimated 6.4 million enrollees reported incorrect false information in order to qualify for zero premium plans. And some of them were doing it, maybe had done it themselves. The other was you had sort of navigators who were enrolling people for the sort of bonuses that you get for the number of people you enroll. And so they were offering either discounts or gift cards or such in order to get people to enroll, whether they qualified or not. And another consequence was you had 12 million people who were enrolled in Obamacare coverage in the individual market, who had zero claims. My co-author on a paper, Brian Blaze, his organization, the Paragon Health Institute, did some great research on this. The number of people with zero claims, again, receiving no care while enrolled in this type of coverage, increased by 40%. So we've got 40% of enrollees in the individual market who are phantom enrollees. They're not getting care despite taxpayers spending billions of dollars. That 35 billion, I think is the number, ended up going to line the pockets of health insurance companies. And so if you're thinking about, well, who's making the argument in favor of extending these COVID credits? Well, it's going to be, sort of follow where the money's going, and it's going to be the insurance companies. And so that's why you're going to see probably a full court press lobbying effort by insurance companies, encouraging, whomever they can on Capitol Hill to extend these subsidies because they receive a massive benefit of it.
Yeah. And we've talked about this before. This incestuous relationship between the medical systems, the hospitals, the health insurance companies, and then now you've got the government involved. It's a very incestuous relationship that ought to be fully examined for multiple reasons. But it's a very, very shady business to be in at this juncture. And furthermore, you've got really market dominance, monopoly level type market dominance by some of these major carriers, which makes it very unaffordable. And then you've got the Obamacare coming in, making matters worse. Trevor, where do you think this is going to end? I mean, and first off, let me ask, when Republicans say that we want a clean continuing resolution or a clean spending bill, from your assessment, is it really clean? Or, I mean, what are we looking at here, generally speaking, for this bill?
Well, I think it's important to, as you were talking about in the previous segment, they have to get to a point where we are at a point where there's a deadline in front of us. And so that's why it's important just to stick with what would be a clean continuing resolution, a clean spending bill that holds the status quo. Now, these Biden COVID credits are set to expire by law at the end of this calendar year. So adding them to whatever spending bill is agreed to is going to be an increase in spending. And the Congressional Budget Office estimated that that'd be $450 billion over the next decade. I don't really think taxpayers should be on the hook for an extra $40 billion plus a year in spending that is both inflationary and does nothing to help or improve the situation for the enrollees. Once these credits expire, the enrollees who are making income up to, say, 150% of federal poverty, so pretty close to the poverty limit, they're only expected to be contributing a few dollars a week, I think maybe four at most, to their premiums. And that's a reasonable amount. And it's important to have sort of that reasonable limit because it ensures that the people who are enrolled actually are enrolled. If you have zero premiums, you're going to have people who have no idea that they're enrolled in coverage, so they're not seeking care. They may already be covered by an employer plan, or they could be enrolled in Medicaid. I think 1.6 million people were doubly covered by Medicaid and a Obamacare plan. So Congratulations, taxpayers. You picked up the bill, not once, but twice.
Yeah.
And that's an unfortunate thing. We really need to have accountability. And relatedly, the regulations on the books anticipate for program integrity in the Obamacare marketplace to ensure that only people who are actually eligible are enrolled. The regulations that are currently on the books anticipate the expiration of these Biden COVID credits. So if they don't expire as they're intended, then we're going to have to reopen those regulations and take another look at them. And that's going to put even more as work on the plate of the Department of Health and Human Services when they've got a lot of other pressing things to work on instead of revisiting old regulations.
Yeah, I just can't wait for the Congressional Budget Office to come out and talk about how much more debt this is going to add to our deficit, which they love to do on President Trump stuff. But let's look at you said $400 billion over a decade that would be added if they continue this.
That was, I think, the latest episode is $450 billion over the next decade. But again, one thing that people should be aware of about the Congressional Budget Office's scoring is they're generally wrong. Now, I think it's important to realize that CBO scores are helpful sort of directionally. But generally speaking, the CBO score is going to be wrong. The question is just by how much and in what direction. And so that $450 billion could be well, it could be less, I guess, but it's more likely going to be more. And in particular, I mention this because when it comes to Obamacare subsidies, the CBO has an incredibly poor track record of making their estimates. That goes for, generally speaking, CBO scores, because their crystal ball may be on back order just like mine is, and so they can't do the perfect analysis here, and so it is taking into account variables and so forth.
Yeah.
But they've been particularly bad on this question.
Yeah, you're right, Trevor. Once again, we've been talking to Trevor Carlson with the Foundation for Government Accountability, Senior Research Fellow there. Hey, Trevor, real quick, we got about 15 seconds left. Tell our folks what your URL is.
It's thefga.org.
thefga.org. And if you're watching on video, it's right behind Trevor on the banner. Hey, Trevor, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. There you go. That's Trevor Carlson with the Foundation for Government Accountability. And if you listen to interviews like that, boy, that will make you say, please stop spending my tax dollars on everybody else. Please stop. And, this is actually a very much bipartisan thing. The entire DOGE, which is the essence of what we were talking about there, government efficiency. The entire government efficiency, cutting waste, is a very much but this polls very well. We're talking 70 to 80% polling amongst Republicans and Democrats that are in favor of not spending money on wasteful things like we just talked to Trevor about. And so, I find it so interesting how the Democrats literally lobby for non-citizen items. Like they're lobbying for health care for illegal immigrants as part of this whole spending package. And supposedly those aren't even supposed to be voters. Like when you find yourself spending most of your time lobbying for people who aren't even in your voting district or state, and it has no effect on their interest, then what are you even doing there? We're supposed to be the elected representatives representing the people that sent us to Washington, D.C. And so I just don't know how the Democrats keep surviving elections and getting reelected at the ballot box with this level of not representing the voters who sent you to Washington, D.C. It's quite baffling. And maybe that's why we have President Trump in the White House and the trifecta with the Congress. Maybe because Democrats have refused repeatedly to represent the interest of those voters who elected them. All right, folks, we've got a great guest coming up in the next segment. Oklahoma Treasurer Todd Russ is going to be with us to talk about corporate engagement and how to properly manage the funds of some of these state departments and state funds in Oklahoma specifically. That's what we'll be talking about. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a few.
Every day, AFA offers biblical insight on issues that others aren't willing to touch in the hopes that you'll become a world changer. That's why we're offering an in-depth worldview training course called Activate. 13 different professors teaching 18 sessions, all available online, including a printed workbook to help you apply what you've learned and 1-year access to AFA streaming content to give you even more resources. Find out more about Activate and sign up today at activate.afa.net. The Lord is my shepherd. Those are the first 5 words of the 23rd Psalm, and they're printed on the front of the Psalm 23:1 apparel in the AFA Resource Center. Those words, along with the image of a lamb, will be a simple reminder to you and others that your trust is in the one who never fails. They're available as t-shirts or sweatshirts in a variety of colors. So check out the Psalm 23:1 collection anytime at resources.afa.net.
This is Abraham Hamilton III with AFR, and we're sending Bibles. Here's Michael with Bible League International.
Here's a horrific story. In the Middle East, radical Muslims burned down the house of Nora, nearly killing her and her 4 daughters, the youngest of which, 4 years of age, maimed for life with serious burns. You know what her crime is? 2 things. Number 1, Nora is a born-again believer. And number 2, she was caught educating her daughters beyond the age of 8. In that part of the world, in that system, that is a serious violation. But would you know it? Nora has gone on to lead about 100 women to Christ Christ who have seen the grace and gumption in her life. They want Jesus, and they live where it's impossible to get a Bible, and that's why we're praying you'll get involved today. Abraham, during the month of October, we want to bless 4,000 Bibleless believers in the world that we know by name at Bible League. It happens at $5 a Bible, only $5 a Bible, $100 sends 20, 500 sends 100, and every gift match.
You can give by calling 800-YES-WORD, 800-YES-WORD, or visit sendbiblesnow.org. That's sendbiblesnow.org.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. Baylor University is struggling with an infestation of wokeness among its student body. Baylor was once the largest Baptist school in the nation. Now they prefer to be known as a Christian school. A recent lecture stirred controversy when the speaker, identified as Christina Crenshaw, raised an issue regarding transgenderism. She was asked whether parents who don't want their daughters sharing a bathroom with a boy had any say in the matter. Students accused her of being unkind and unwelcoming to transgender people. They filed a formal complaint. The Baylor Lariat, the student newspaper, condemned Crenshaw as being transphobic. They later retracted that accusation and apologized. The controversy was so outrageous, the provost, Nancy Brickhouse, wrote an editorial in the student newspaper defending the lecturer's freedom of speech. You know, it's a really sad day when Christian students at a Christian university can't even muster up Christian fellowship. Be sure to get a copy of my new book, Twilight's Last Gleaming, at toddstarnes.com.
This is At the Core on American Family Radio with your host, Walker Wildmon.
Welcome back to the program here on American Family Radio. Well, every week we try to have on different state officials, sometimes statewide officials, to talk about the work that they're doing. And in many cases, these states are ones that we have a pretty broad listening audience. And so we have on with us now Oklahoma State Treasurer Todd Russ is with us, and we've got a huge listening audience there in the state of Oklahoma, and the Treasurer is with us now. Todd, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Walker. Good to be here again.
Yeah, absolutely. We wanted to have you on to talk about some of your work on corporate engagement. As obviously as Treasurer, you manage the state funds, the state accounts, and this is something we've been engaged in recently over the last 2 to 3 years. And that is, hey, we own funds, we own shares, we own, percentages of different stocks, and they have annual meetings where you can have your voice be heard on the trajectory of the company and how they're spending shareholder funds. And so you've been doing the same thing over in Oklahoma, and I wanted to let you talk a little bit about that work.
Yeah, we looked back 5 or 6 years ago and realized there was a few things that kind of caught our attention, and then we got to digging in a little deeper and found out, we're voting on issues, shareholder proposals that are completely against industries that support the tax base in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma values, lots of things, and we started asking questions. What is going on here? Why are our shares being voted like that? And, there's just a lot of rabbit holes we could go down. We could talk all day on it. But when we realized what was happening, the legislature actually got involved, and they tried to run some legislation that's got held up in the courts. But in the meantime, I came in about 3 years ago as the treasurer and kind of got to looking at what's going on. And, I told some of my boards, I said, look, we don't have to have a law. We don't have to have any more laws than what we already have to guide us in making good business decisions. And when these kinds of proposals come up, we should have the ability to vote no. And so we've been on this long journey to figure out where the people are that run all the levers, that do all the voting, and who does the voting and who doesn't do the voting. And you get into the proxy season and proxy resolutions and things. And we've gotten pretty wise on what's going on with the opposition, what the other side's been doing, and we've decided that we can't just negotiate on simple terms. We really need to get in the arena and really start fighting back, and that's kind of what Oklahoma's been doing.
Yeah, and I want to applaud you for that, because there's over 20, I think 28, you'll know exactly, but 28 states with Republican treasurers, and that's a big deal. That's a lot of the country. That if you guys get together as a coalition and speak some common sense into these corporate boardrooms, you can make a lot of impact. And one of the more recent examples, I know this goes back to the last filing season, but You made a lot of headlines because of one of the proposals you put forth with the Lululemon company and some of the left-wing groups that they were funding, some of these rioting and looting groups around the country that they were funding through these NGOs. And that's just one example. But there's example after example that you've been speaking at these shareholder meetings or having others speak on your behalf, where the corporations are acting against the interest of the people of Oklahoma. And that's your duty to represent the people of Oklahoma and specifically represent the funds in Oklahoma. And so this is a no-brainer. You're just simply representing the people who sent you into this public office.
Yeah, it seems like a no-brainer until the opposition lets loose and starts, trying to beat you down in the courts or in the press and the media and those kinds of things. And they play a really good game. They have a good offense and defense, and you've got to be ready for that. And it seems like the conservatives have been a little bit slow showing up and figured out how the battle strategies have to be drawn. But we actually found a place, and it's a lot more complicated than it sounds, because I manage about $18 billion in the state's general fund, and we also have about $40 billion in pension funds. That's spread out over about 6 different pensions. We also have a endowment fund that's got about $2 billion in it. You would think it'd be easy to go find places that you could file qualified shareholder proposals. It's not. First of all, you've got to get the board to align with you, and that board is being guided and directed and recommended by their chief investment officer, who's friends with the investment consultant that's a national big name that you could probably think of some of those names, and 95% of those or more are aligned with the left. So the consultant's going to make a recommendation to their buddy, who is the chief financial officer, who is the guiding force for the board to make recommendations. And they're going to tell their story in a way that sounds like it's more credible than these radical, wild ideaed right thinkers. And then your board freezes up and thinks they're better off just not do anything. So, even though there's several states that are involved, it is really tough finding a chink in the armor. But fortunately, Oklahoma was able to find an opportunity to do that, and we've dug in pretty hard and ran fast through the line. And we actually, a small state like Oklahoma, you really figured they'd probably just throw it up and laugh and just wad it up and laugh and throw it in the waste basket. But we actually got some traction with these big national corporations. And I think so far we've got at least 2 or 3 to move off of their position or take a position that was satisfactory to us at this point.
Yeah. And to your point there, the last point you made, part of the battle is just showing up. And so to your point, even though you may get only a handful of percentage of votes at some of these meetings, which we've experienced, simply opening the dialogue, oftentimes you can make a lot of headway that way by simply showing up to the game, if you will, to use an analogy.
Absolutely.
Also, I wanted to note, this notion, and I know you've been catching a lot of flack in the media, which is probably a badge of honor for you, as it is for us, but the Democrats are deploying similar tactics here. So this is not a new phenomenon or a novel approach that only you, for example, are using. I've covered stories where Democrat officials from New York City and other places, California, they've petitioned through various shareholder engagement proposals and other means, legal threats as well. They've been petitioning these pharmacies to sell the abortion pill. I covered that several weeks ago. And so, this notion that only the conservative treasurers are engaging this way is just completely not true. The left has pretty much dominated this financial marketplace for a long time, and you guys are finally showing up to the scene and making some headway. And so I just want to congratulate you on that and dispel this myth that you guys are the only ones doing it. Now, the left is doing the same thing, and the media is just upset that you guys showed up to the party and are speaking into the corporate boardroom as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, they started this game long ago. It came out of Europe, the Paris Climate Accords and all the net zero 100 alliances, and there's about 4 or 5 of those that they created. That most of those, if not all of them, really originated out of the European attitudes on climate and all these other DEI, ESG, and then it kind of started to take hold in the U.S. and nobody was watching, and only the big corporate and the C-suites knew what was going on. You'd mentioned, not getting a lot of votes in favor of it. We never expect to get a vote that's going to be able to move it through the ballot process. I mean, you've got to get like 5%, but you got to know there's only about 17 to 19% of the people that are actually voting all the votes in these corporations. And most of those are the big BlackRocks and the big money holders that get to influence all the proxies. I mean, it's just, if people realize how the numbers worked in these worlds, it's mind boggling. And so for us to show up at all is a very, very significant concern for them, number one, because they don't want the bad press. And it's kind of like somebody's on to us. They know that we're watching. And not only now are we not just watching, we're calling them out. And that's hitting national publications, not as many as they have, but we are definitely putting them in a spotlight and calling them out for some of the things that they're doing. And it's just absolutely exciting to think that we can actually hold them accountable and get them to move and work with us on some of these. We're actually filing another, I think, 10 more resolutions this proxy season on some areas that we're just going to hold them accountable, and it's unfortunate. We don't want to over politicize the investment world. We'd rather not be in this. We think it really needs to be based on neutral performance and not all these political things, but they're forcing all of these political initiatives from the left. And I always tell people and I tell the media, we want them to be in the middle. We don't want them to be extreme right or left. We want them to be in the middle. But if the only pressure they're getting is from the left, they'll never get to the middle. And so we're putting that pressure from the right on where we have to, until the investment world figures out this is not about politics. It's about performance and fiduciary obligations that they have, and maybe force them out of this arena altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, to your point, and you're good friends with Jerry Boyer and his outfit, but this is, Jerry and I talk all the time every week about how these companies just need to focus on their core business functions and serving their customers to the best of their ability, and quit funding these left-wing nonprofits. Don't fund any nonprofits. You don't have to fund AFA. You don't have to fund the Human Rights Campaign. If you're a hardware store, sell the best hardware, have the best customer service, and stay out of the political realm and just serve your customers well. That's all we're asking for is neutrality. Not a very hard ask. Oklahoma Treasurer Todd Russ has been our guest on his corporate engagement work there in the state of Oklahoma. Treasurer, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Thank you, Walker. It's great to be on. See you later.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. That's Todd Russ. He's the state treasurer there in the state of Oklahoma and doing a lot of good work there in the corporate engagement realm with our good friend Jerry Boyer and others, our friends over at ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom as well. And so this is a good movement we've got going in the Republican state official realm, all these various treasurers, over 28 to be exact, that are engaging in this coalition work to speak into America's corporate boardrooms. One other thing I want to mention on this front, for those of you listening that are interested in this topic, maybe you yourself have investments, I want to explain where things go wrong from an individual standpoint, because we'll have people call us and they'll say, well, I want to do this. I want to speak at shareholder meetings. I want to vote at shareholder meetings. All right, here's the problem. And I'm not an investment advisor, not a financial advisor, but let me just tell you my layman's understanding of how this voting works, all right? If you own funds like an ETF or another index fund, you don't own direct shares in said company, okay? Because what happens is these funds, within the funds are the direct shares of various companies, right? So the S&P 500 has 500 companies within the S&P 500 fund or index, okay? And so whoever manages the master fund, they're the ones voting, okay? They're the ones voting at the meetings. So if you have ownership or have shares in an ETF, well, whoever manages that ETF, they're the ones actually showing up at the annual shareholder meetings, not you. And you can't. You can't vote through funds, okay? Tracking with me? And so I know this gets a little bit in the weeds, but I'm trying to keep it simple. So you can basically own shares of companies directly or indirectly, okay? Directly is if you buy 100 shares in Nike, which I probably wouldn't recommend, but because they're uber left wing. But if you own 100 shares in Nike, then those are 100 shares in Nike. They'll show up on your investment statement, and you can vote at the shareholder meeting as long as the dollar amount's over a certain threshold and you've had it for like over a year. If you own an ETF in your retirement account that Nike is underneath that, but so is 30 other companies, you can't show up at the shareholder meeting. That investment fund is the one that's going to vote on your behalf whether you like it or not. And they may vote in a manner in which you don't like. And so the main way to get into this shareholder engagement world is to do this thing called, if you want to have the same effect as a fund, you can get into what's called direct indexing. And there's companies out there that do this. But they basically track, for example, they track the S&P 500, but they directly own it. The investor directly owns it, and it just tracks it along with the S&P 500. And so, but you've got to directly own the shares of the company. You can't be going through some big fund or some, ETF. It has to be direct ownership as a shareholder, so you can show up at the shareholder meeting and vote your ballot or your ballots, depending on how many shares you own. And so that's investment engagement, corporate engagement 101. And I probably completely dropped the ball on half of that stuff. But once again, I'm not an expert. I did put together a pretty lengthy video explaining this. We'll link to it in the show notes. Explaining corporate engagement 101. We'll link to that in the show notes over at afr.net. We'll see you next time.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.